And now from Michael Caron. What do you do with your pruners and loppers to keep them in tip-top shape?
So I do three things. One is I keep the sap buildup off. I like to keep them really clean, so I usually clean them after the end of every pruning session. I like to use a degreaser called Simple Green, but I've used other ones too, including some of the citrus degreasers. They all work really well. I like them because they don't tend to irritate my skin.
WD-40 type products have been recommended in a lot of fact sheets. And why don't you like those?
They're a little bit more expensive than, say, something like Simple Green. The Simple Green doesn't irritate my skin like the petroleum products do, like WD-40. And WD-40, a lot of people think that it's going to do a good job and lubricate their tools, and it doesn't. So I clean them separately with an environmentally friendly degreaser. And then I use air tool oil usually to oil them when I'm done cleaning.
So what does the oil do?
So the oil does two things. It lubricates the joints and the moving parts to help keep the metal from rubbing on itself at the hinge and helps them last longer. And that also reduces the drag and the friction, so it's easier on my hands. And I also like to put a thin layer on all of the exposed metal, and that helps keep rust and pitting to a minimum, especially if I inadvertently leave them laying in the garden somewhere for a few days, which does happen.
So pruning loppers and hand pruners is different than sharpening a knife blade. And a lot of times people will purchase a simple tool from a hardware store that you drag a knife through. Why are those bad for loppers and pruners?
The typical knife sharpener, if you're getting one of those simple ones that kind of have built-in stones that you just pull the knife through, and they have the stones aligned at angles to sharpen both sides of the blade at the same time. Most pruners, or at least quality pruners, are only sharpened on one side, and so those kind of tools that you would use for knives then would actually ruin or dull the blade of most loppers and pruners, which just have a beveled edge on one side. So you want to keep the blade as flat as you can on the back side and a nice straight bevel on the other side that you're going to sharpen, so that you don't have little bits of, say, uncut wood material that kind of hangs after you've made the major cut.
We have other tools in our sheds that need to be sharpened. What do you do to sharpen those?
So there's different things that I've done with those. I have a little bench in my garage, and I have a vise that's mounted to it. So I will usually just mount them in there, and I just use a hand file to put an edge on them. But if it's a new shovel or it's been really dinged up in with rocks and things, I might use a small grinder like on a Dremel tool, or even a bench grinder to kind of put a good edge on there. That metal's a lot thicker, and it's going to take a lot more time to do it. But I typically only look at those or touch those up yearly, where with pruners and loppers, I usually touch up the edge on those and keep those sharp every time I use them.
So, Mike, before we go, you wanted to talk about one more important, or at least very useful, sharpening tool.
So what I like to carry with me is a small, like a 400 grit diamond whetstone. That's what I use to just generally touch up my pruners and loppers while I'm out in the field, or even if I take them back into the garage and give them a little bit more working over, to just kind of generally keep it sharp. It doesn't have to be like smooth and polished like you would have like a fine kitchen knife polished. So I don't worry about it, that much, but I just like to carry a small stone with me, and I find that works really well for most of the sharpening that needs to be done on these simple hand tools.
Well, Mike, thank you again. I appreciate all your time.
Yep, thanks for having me on. We'll talk to you soon.
The Homegrown Horticulture Podcast is a production of Utah State University Extension. Music is composed by Savannah Peterson and the Joy Drops and is used by permission. Thank you again for listening.